A late night last night, the first session ending in the early hours of this morning, in fact, with a statement. Now, there were no huge groundbreaking announcements in there, but it is worth going through them one by one in any case. First off, the European leaders expressing their solidarity with Ukraine and calling on Russia to withdraw from the country, respect Ukraine's territorial integrity. And they also, of course, repeated their call for a ceasefire. They're also calling for humanitarian corridors not only to be set up but to be respected. Of course, as we've been reporting on France 24, there have been repeated attempts to set up humanitarian corridors out of cities like Mariupol, which are under siege, to allow civilians safe passage out, but those have all repeatedly fallen apart under attacks from the Russian military. In terms of support for Ukraine, the leaders pledging more support in terms of financial, material, humanitarian support, and saying that they are ready to move quickly on more sanctions as necessary. This is an informal summit, so just a technical point. They were not going to agree on more sanctions at this point, but they are telling us that there certainly are in the pipeline. And then on that issue of Ukraine's bid to eventually join the European Union that's been so much talked about recently, there were big, long and apparently fairly feisty discussions on this point. A relatively clear split between Eastern and Western member states of the European Union. Those who want Ukraine to get some kind of acceleration towards candidate status. That is the first step of a long-ish process of joining the European Union, it must be said. And then Western European countries in the main saying, look, at this point, it's more concrete help that we should be looking at. The accession issue would be for later on. In the end, in the final statement, there was wording saying that Ukraine is part of the European family. There was talk about strengthening bonds and deepening the partnership. Essentially, all sides claiming a victory here, really saying, we're showing more support for Ukraine, and those who want Ukraine to have a sped up candidacy process, saying that they feel that that is knitted into that statement from last night.
And Catherine, today really looking at sort of the fallout of the war, whether it's defense or the economy. What do you expect we'll hear today?
That's right, yeah, yesterday's zoning in on a lot of specifics. Today, much more bigger picture issues, and the leaders getting a briefing from Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank. There is, of course, already economic blowback on the European Union from this war, from the sanctions that the EU has imposed on Russia. President Macron, for example, is leading the calls for joint borrowing by all 27 EU member states on the international markets in order to finance a sort of a recovery or an economic booster package to help float the EU's member states through this economic turbulence. You'll remember that happened already back in 2020 when the EU 27 came together and agreed on this joint borrowing at this scale for the first time ever. There is some quite strong resistance on that, for example, from the Netherlands, traditionally not a country inclined to go in for that sort of thing, and where it was very controversial the first time around. On some other bigger picture areas, macroeconomic areas, they are looking at making Europe less dependent on outside powers for their resources. One example, of course, Russian energy, but there are several other sectors they're looking at as well, including defense sector, food, semiconductors, farming. This is a subject that we have heard about increasingly in recent months, but it really has been propelled up the agenda by the crisis in Ukraine, focusing European minds on their own autonomy in the face of this kind of crisis.